Okay, we are in Kuf Yud Gimel, Halacha Yud Gimel. I'm sorry, Halacha Yud Daled. Beya, Afapisha Uya L'Goy Mechaya. Eggs, even though you could possibly swallow them raw, in Bishul Avkechav Masura, if a guy cooked it.
Really?
Halacha Yud Daled. Halacha Yud Daled. If Kuf Yud Gimel, Halacha Yud Daled. In Bishul Avkechav Asur. If a guy cooks it, it's Asur, meaning it needs Bishul Yisrael. Okay, so what is this? It comes from a Gemara. The Gemara says this is a machlokes whether a Be'at Sluya needs Bishul Yisrael or not. Okay, and our din is saying like the shita that's machmir. When it's about a roasted broiled egg, whether it needs Bishul Yisrael, and the Gemara has a machlokes and said that it's
we have it by the bread with the.
We're going to get that. We're actually going to get that. We're actually going to get that in a second. Yes, very good. We're going to get to that. Okay, now.
I do remember something.
So what's the machlokes? What's the machlokes? The Gemara doesn't say what the machlokes is. The Gemara just says two things. Okay, so Rashi on that Gemara says that the machmir according to Rashi is the simple shita. It needs Bishul Yisrael because it needs Bishul Yisrael. The reason why someone might think to be makel is because when you make an egg, the guy who makes the egg never touches the egg. Okay, the egg is in its shell, and since he never touches it, what? The meat, the edible part. He never touches the edible part of the egg, and therefore it's not considered Bishul Akum because the makel holds. Because since the guy never touched it, it's not Bishul Akum. Meaning.
Ever has to touch anything?
So Rashi is learning that's the machlokes in the Gemara whether in the Isser Bishul Akum was it set up as an Isser like Stam Yayin, like an Isser of like if a guy touches your food, that even though it's called Bishul Akum, but if Rashi says you might think that the makel holds that if the guy doesn't touch it, it's not Asur. Now Rashi doesn't say. The Gemara does. The Gemara's case is of an egg. And an egg is something that you can't touch the inside. It's an egg with its peel on it.
We're not talking about sunny side up.
Right, correct. So Rashi doesn't say that the maker would hold that if you cook a piece of meat on the fire and you never touch the piece of meat, Rashi didn't say that the maker holds like that. Rashi talks about a case where it's an egg where it's not possible to touch the thing. Right. Rashi doesn't say the maker holds, and we don't have reason to think the maker would hold like that. This is like a special protected food that the maker would hold that protected food does not need Bishul Yisrael. Again, we don't pass like that. And of course, according to Rashi, we understand why the Gemara picked this special case of a Be'at Sluya. Okay, I don't exactly know what a Be'at Sluya is. I don't know exactly what that means, but it must be one that has the shell, that's still with the shell on it. When we make Be'at Sluya, we take the shell off. But anyhow, whatever it means is that a case with the shell on, and we can see in according to Rashi why the Gemara picked a very specific case. Okay, now. None of the later posts can bring Rashi. Okay, that's what Rashi says on the Gemara. That's not what the later posts can do. Not learn Pshat in the machlokes like Rashi. Okay. Tosfos in Yevamos, Tosfos in Yevamos says that he has a kasha. How could the Gemara say that have a machlokes whether eggs need to be Bishul Yisrael or not? How could it have a machlokes about it when there's a Gemara in Be'er that says that you could eat eggs raw? Okay, the people could eat eggs raw. Okay, and for Tosfos. And in other words, we understand the makel. According to Tosfos, we understand why someone would be makel because you could eat their nefachai. That's what Tosfos is really talking about whether things are nefachai. That's what Tosfos is talking about. So we understand the makel being nefachai, but why would someone be machmir and say that?
He's comparing an egg to a banana, basically.
Yeah, it's edible raw. And for Tosfos, that when you eat an egg raw, the words of Tosfos are ein zu achila chashuva, which means is, I have two ways of understanding it. Let's say the simple way, which is, it's not the way, the more sophisticated, fancy way of eating an egg to eat it raw. You can eat it. That's not the more sophisticated way to eat it. And the meal doesn't count. Okay? The meal, the machmir holds that doesn't make it nefachai. Even though you could eat it raw, and people do eat it raw. The Gemara says you do, and you can eat it raw, but that's not the right way to eat it, and therefore it's not the machmir holds. That's not considered nefachai.
Just like we've discussed before, let's say it depends on the continent where they live in. Meaning, like in Guinea, they'll eat palms raw, or this, they'll eat palms raw.
Of course it depends on the
country. So let me ask you, let's say that you're in the Philippines, and everybody eats eggs raw. Doesn't it have to be?
Of course that's correct.
This is not considered a universal.
No, of course not. Of course it depends on the... Now, so according to... Now, Tosfos says, ein zu achil chashuv. I wasn't sure if what Tosfos meant was that there's different ways to eat eggs, and this one is not a chashuv way, and the other ways of eating, let's say, a fried egg, that's the more better way to eat it. Does it mean that it's not an achil chashuv, or it's not the achil chashuv? Okay, I'm not sure if I'm. Meaning, is it that is it that we take for each food, we take one specific way of eating? You say, this is the achil chashuv, this is the way you eat it. A piece of chicken, you eat it broiled. And as we think of the achil chashuv, and anything else doesn't count. Okay, or I mean, it's just that there could be many achil chashuvas, and this is just not one of them.
That's it. And achil chashuv doesn't mean there's no other.
Okay, so in other words, it could be five of them.
You'd be forced to say that if, I don't know, like 40% of people ate something one way, 30 another way, and 30, like the raw, then 30 is not...
Then it wouldn't count. You're saying that wouldn't count. So just because in this one, if there's 5 normal ways to eat it, and this is a really odd way of eating it, then that's like, okay, that's fine. I can take that. Okay, we'll see. This is going to come up again in a minute. That's why I'm mentioning this. It's going to come up again later. Anyhow, Beis Yosef and the later place can bring this Tosfos. Okay, and what Tosfos has said is meduyik, that the Beis Yosef is holding like that from the words of the Shulchan Aruch. The Shulchan Aruch said, we pass like the machmir, Be'er needs Bishul Yisroel. Even though it's possible to swallow it raw, still it needs it. I mean, he's implying what Tosfos said. Even though you might think that you could eat it raw, I mean, even though the Gemara says that you can eat eggs raw, Alpha Pikim B'machmir, telling us, which is what Tosfos said, that it's not considered Nefachai because Ein Zu Achil Chashuv. Okay? Fine. Second to lastly is that the Taz says that it's he says, even though the Gemara says you could eat it raw, he says it's a doichik gadol to eat it raw, and therefore it's really how do I say it? It's you could only passively. It's really hard to get it down. People could do it, but it's not anything that's even within range of people doing. So you can't physically get it down. You can get it down, but it's not like passively edible, but it's not. And you would eat it like that, and therefore it's not. So when the Gemara says you could eat it raw, it's true you can eat it raw, but no, it's so unusual or it's so not the typical way to eat it that doesn't count.
It's like raw meat.
What?
It's like for egg that's not it's passable to eat.
This has a lot of significance that it can be eaten raw. And then it's not muktzah, right?
That's what the Gemara is talking about, yes.
Okay.
That's good.
So I'm saying with the other things that would be muktzah. You see, egg is different.
Right.
Raw meat, raw chicken might be muktzah.
Ken said that his father used to eat raw eggs. There's such a thing, you know what I mean? But there's such a potatoes. Nobody eats potatoes raw. You can't get it down. I mean, you can get it down if you hurt yourself.
Well, nowadays they eat sushi raw.
What?
Meat can also be that.
That's true. I mean, it's also not muktzah.
Sushi raw.
I know, so...
I mean, I don't know about nowadays. I'm not saying that. Midnight Gemara, meat is just sushi.
Yeah, nowadays they say raw meat is muktzah. I'm
not talking about now. Midnight Gemara. Okay, so now.
What about
singers? It's usual for them to eat raw eggs.
Right, so it's not a matter of usual, matter of, the word doichik gadol is not a matter, when I say the word usual, that's not the right translation. It's how difficult this is to get it down. The singer is forcing himself to take it down because somehow that's good for his...
What does that doichik?
What?
What's that doichik mean?
What do you think it means?
Yeah, no, you only eat if you have no other choice.
Because...
It doesn't taste good. Whatever. Nobody wants to eat unless you're single, like you have a very...
So how's that different than what I said? That's exactly what I said.
So you make it sound like it's hard to swallow down.
Hard to swallow because it doesn't taste... you could swallow down gasoline also, I mean, if you wanted to. It's hard to get it down because it doesn't taste good. That's what I mean, hard to get it down. Not like it's too fat. I mean, it doesn't taste good. Okay, so now, the Bach says this, really, I mean, the Taz says this, you might not realize it from this halacha, but his point really is from the next halacha, is that, remember, we saw a few halachas ago that there's a machlokes. What happens if food is only nefachai idei chag? What happens if you can only eat it if it's hard to eat? Some people eat it, but not so many people eat nefachai. We had that small fish that were salted. There was a machlokes. The Shulchan Aruch brought 2 opinions. So Taz says, how come over there's a machlokes? There's 2 opinions in the Shulchan Aruch whether it's considered edible raw, and in our din, and it's really even more in the next din, there's no din. Everyone agrees that it's not considered edible raw. So he says this is a doichik gadol. It's really hard to get it down, and that's a little difficult to get it down. Okay, so that's the difference. In our case, where it's really hard to get it down, that's considered. Everyone agrees it's not edible raw. And the din in Halacha Beis was talking about where it's sort of hard to get it down. Okay, I don't know exactly where you draw the line, but that's what he's being bothered. Okay, now the Bach, the Taz's farmer, the Bach says the Bach has a different teretz for those kashrus, which we're not going to talk about. The Bach has a different yishuv to what the stira between Halacha Beis and our halacha and the next halacha. Okay, here's a different. If you want to look into it, there's a Bach has a whole different shot into answering the stira. Okay, now before we move on to the next part of what we have to do, I want to just mention there's somebody here in town, and the one who calls him is Rabbi Mordechai Turov. I don't know if any of you know him. So he has a kasha. And his question was, we're saying, the Gemara says, and the din is, that an egg is not considered nechal chai. He says, so what do you say about the fact that nowadays there are desserts that are made with whipped eggs? They take raw eggs and they whip them, and you can make different kinds. You have to mix in some sugar, you mix in some Rich's whip, you mix in some different things, but basically you can make desserts out of whipped eggs without cooking them. So
doesn't it when you put it, eat it with other things?
So that's
What's this question?
So the question is, so even though the din is saying that it's not considered nechal chai, but we should consider nechal chai because you could be served it. The Tal's dinner may have served it.
No, so in the egg is the ikr.
You can't do it.
What is sugar?
But can you whip? Wait, you can't whip. You can't. No. I'm saying is that if you whip. If you go,
make ice cream out of eggs.
if you go into
It's not the ikr.
for Shabbos at someone's house this week, they might serve you this dish, whipped eggs with some sugar mixed in as a dessert. Okay? No one ever served you whipped gasoline. I mean, it doesn't work and it doesn't taste good. But this is a real food. It's a real thing.
Anything with salted fish.
The what?
A salted fish also can be eaten raw.
Sushi.
Okay.
A salted fish. No, so that's a small salted fish. A small salted fish. It's a machlokes because it's sort of edible raw, sort of not edible raw.
Yeah.
This is not maybe edible raw. This
Somebody
is
said that you can eat it raw by salting that. There's no more Bishul. You don't eat Bishul Yisroel
It
anymore.
had the process of Ushon.
if it was salt. If it was small fish. If you had made them. No, that's not correct. If you had made them. Oh, you're saying if you had. Let's think a second. You took the small fish and you cooked them straight. You cooked them straight without salting them. So you would say, those fish are not nechal chai because you needed something to make them edible. So over here also, we say if you would whip the egg and then you cook it, it would be mutter. If you didn't whip the egg, then it should be awesome.
Oh, if I salted fish, if you cook it after salting, it's mutter?
Yes.
Yeah?
Well, that's us. No. The reason why it might not be is only because it might not be considered edible even if you salted it. It might not even be considered edible if you salt. That was the machlokes in halakha base. We're saying, let's say it would be considered edible. Let's say if you salt it a lot. That's it. If you salt it a lot, then you cook it. Then it's mutter.
Rabbi here says very good. He says over by these eggs, the eggs is only used as a binder for everything else. There, it's not these things when you make meringue.
Meringue, that's the yicker. Otherwise, if you take the sugar, you can't beat sugar into a...
Right. That's
You make
what
whipped cream, whip up an egg and eat it straight?
No.
A little sugar and eat it?
No, a lot of sugar. It's a meringue.
A lot of sugar?
Yeah, you know how much sugar.
So you're saying is that the egg's role is there just to hold the sugar together?
Yeah.
I think it's fluffy and pretty.
Yeah.
Is that true?
Yeah. Knowing as a chef,
It
right?
doesn't taste like, it doesn't taste like eggs. It tastes like
Sugar.
Sugar just has like sugar. Okay.
That's what I would.
The whole
It's white sugar and white vinegar.
pie seems to me,
White sugar?
you can eat the thing itself unadulterated the way it is. That's what it.
I think so.
Not
I
if you
think
can
double
throw
check with
whippets
the,
and everything.
You're saying so you're saying okay. Okay, so these two I didn't think of. This I thought of. So you saying so why don't you say you're saying is that since I have to do these steps to make it usable, maybe that shouldn't count it as okay.
Excellent.
We talked about that back in all three days. So we talked about such an idea whether something the dinner. We talked about two things. One is that you have to do other things, and one is you have to mix other foods into it.
onions, right?
In the case of onions, that's correct. In the case we talked about onions and ginger back in all three days. Over there, but it's different. I have to think about what you said. Over there, you want the taste of the onion in there. You want the taste of the ginger. You just can't eat it by itself. You eat it with other things. Here you're saying is that the egg is doing nothing for the food. The egg is just holding it together, so to speak. It's not a...
Double check on that thing.
We
I'll
have to
speak
check it.
to
Okay.
dessert chef.
The egg is holding together.
He said is that when you make these desserts with eggs, with whipped eggs, the egg has nothing to do with the taste of the food. The food is sugar. And the egg is putting the sugar into
It's
just
a
the form,
binder.
holding it together and holding this fluffy.
I am sure.
It's sugar.
You know what sugar they put in that meringue?
Okay,
I
so
understand because
so
to give us a texture and give us a...
right, so the
Meringue, they cook afterwards, though, don't they?
okay, so
You don't eat it raw.
the chefs will worry about this. We'll figure this out afterwards.
Figure it
Okay.
out.
Now, the best I would think is that Lamaisa is that if you think about how many eggs there are laid every day in America, how many of those eggs turn up into meringue, and how many of those eggs turn up into hard-boiled eggs and everything else. Okay, and maybe that's not another. Maybe the fact that there is one little way to use them chai may not count as That really depends on the next halacha, which is not we didn't do yet. Okay, it really depends on the next halacha. Okay, so the next halacha has a lot to do with that. Okay, so I'll think about it.
I've heard of many cases of people say, "Oh, you can eat a chai this way," even though 98% of it is not eaten like that.
So that's the next halacha that talks about that. It's going to talk about that whether if there's maybe one way to eat it, maybe that should make it. We'll talk about that then. Okay, now. This is part one. Now, until now, what did we say? The Shulchan Aruch said that we paskin that the eggs are not nechal chai for all different kinds of reasons, and that's why we know, especially Marsh Moskowitz knows that hashgachas make all kinds of efforts to make sure that eggs are Bishul Yisroel. Okay, they make eggs as in like hard-boiled eggs, fried eggs that are frozen. Caterers spend a lot of time making sure their eggs are. You ever go to if you go to a breakfast, they have mashgichim running around like Mr. Glenn turning on a little fire, so people frying eggs all the way.
Eggs is just an ingredient, something.
So then that depends on the whole food. Then you look at the food.
It's not visible as a crust on a food.
So it depends. We talk about way back by then. It depends. Look at the whole food. You look at the whole food and decide whether it's
eggs.
What?
Eggs and ice cream, something.
Eggs and ice cream. So you look at the whole food. You look at the food. The roy of the food in an ice cream is ice cream. The fact that this little egg doesn't count. That's okay. Now, the shiloh that we have on this is everything. We're finished. The Shulchan Aruch said we said everything's fine. Everybody happy with that. The problem is like this. Based on, I'm going to say a sentence first and then I'll explain myself. Based on what we've said of how you define whether something is Oleh Shulchan Melachim, and based on the way we eat food nowadays, it sure seems to me that eggs are not Oleh Shulchan Melachim. Okay? In other words, the Shulchan Aruch didn't talk about that. Shulchan Aruch said, hold on a second, the Shulchan Aruch said, eggs are not nechal chai. Fine, they're not nechal chai. But there's another big rule which is it has to be Oleh Shulchan Melachim. Now, we know, what I meant by what I said was like this. We've said that we judge Shulchan Melachim by how kings eat when they're functioning as kings. Okay? They eat at a royal dinner, this is how they eat. Not by what the king eats for breakfast. Then he's just acting like, then the president is just Bill, okay? Then he's just being a plain old guy. Or Barack now. Okay, he's just being whoever he is. He is whoever he is. When he acts in a official capacity, then he eats a different way. In those kind of ways, they don't serve that food. We judge things by what they serve at a chasana, not what they serve at a bris. Okay, that's how we've talked about this before, and that's how we usually judge Shulchan Aruch. And at the same time, when do they serve these foods? When do you get a hard-boiled egg or a scrambled egg or a poached egg? You get that at a ladies' brunch. Okay, you don't serve that at the Tel's dinner. Okay, they don't serve.
You ever look at a royal breakfast?
What?
You ever look at a royal breakfast? That's my question.
You have to be invited.
I'm not trying to be
You have to be
mocked.
invited.
Even
I can imagine how it's being served.
yes, but the reason why they would. I agree with that. But they would serve that. They would serve that because even though it's a breakfast meeting, has a different sophistication than a dinner meeting. It's by its nature a more casual meeting, and that's not Shulchan Aruch.
Well, it's the nature of the meal.
No.
What?
Breakfast itself, the etzem is not a kosher meal.
Okay.
So the kosher things that they serve at a breakfast is what it is. It's not served at dinner because it's now what you eat for dinner. Saying breakfast itself is
No, because that actually is two ways to serve things at a dinner.
the etzem of breakfast. It's not doing the food that they're
So you're saying is that
So it wasn't a lot of problem.
no. So then any food then is Oleh Shulchan Melachim because when we eat.
No, I'm saying fancier breakfast foods are never going to live up to the standard of being a fancy dinner.
Okay.
Breakfast isn't.
No, so I'm saying to you is that breakfast by its nature is not Shulchan Melachim. By its nature, if the king has a breakfast meeting with somebody, then they're not.
That's only because
You can't have chicken in the morning.
Yeah, you're not going to have.
That's not true.
What?
That's not true.
Really?
Maybe in the Jewish communities, maybe.
Yeah.
But where I came from, is steak and eggs is a staple.
Yeah.
Steak and eggs is a chicken
Sausage
staple.
and eggs.
Sausage and eggs is a
Bacon,
staple.
bacon.
Bacon and eggs is a staple.
That's
And the truth of the matter is that eggs are very much of a staple in dinner because yes. Did you ever have a souffle? They serve souffles at dinner all the time. That's 90% eggs.
I don't know what a souffle is.
Souffle is you take meat or vegetables, put it in a bowl, you pour the eggs till the eggs are top, mix it up a little bit, put it in the oven, and it's called a souffle.
Spinach souffle.
Whatever. And that's dinner. That's 100% dinner. I mean, people eat it for breakfast, but that's
That's
dinner.
not eggs. I'm saying it's some eggs.
That's not eggs.
Scrambled egg, you put in a little bit of something, that's eggs.
Nobody scrambled eggs for dinner.
Souffle isn't called eggs.
Who eats scrambled eggs for dinner? You do? You have cereal for dinner. I mean, I didn't put it Okay.
Okay, we'll have to check into this.
Okay, so I'm willing to accept that. I'm willing to take it. I'll tell you what I was going to say anyhow. But no, it's fine. So you want to say for your
They're two
reason,
separate things to say.
yeah, very different things. But okay, so you're saying is that it's possible to say that there's a Shulchan Melachim to eat at a breakfast meeting, and eat at the Shulchan. You're saying is that at a
Royal breakfast.
breakfast meeting they wouldn't serve farina. They wouldn't serve farina or Cheerios. Anyhow, they might serve eggs and French toast.
Right, sell it at a barista or omelets. The guy making omelets at a barista.
Okay, no, they wouldn't. Even at that kind of place, they're not going to. They're not going to serve. They're not serving anybody hot cereal at that thing. That's not even kosher enough to hit such a thing. And they just aren't serving hot dogs. I'm sorry. They're not serving a piece of chicken because that's not. No one wants to eat that for breakfast. It happens to be no one wants to eat it for breakfast. And he's saying that in fact they really eat them for a fancy meal, and they call them souffle. My taste, souffle doesn't attract me, so I don't think of that. But he's saying really people do eat that. Well, they eat ham and eggs, and that's considered a more kosher machal.
Okay. I'll come to make hard-boiled eggs. If you want like potatoes, right?
Do you ever have egg salad?
Hard-boiled eggs.
Egg salad for breakfast and for dinner.
That's all we'll
And lunch.
So I'm getting to that. Let's. I'm going to get to that second. I'm going to say something else first, just help keep myself in order.
Go ahead.
We saw what Yankee said beforehand, that the Ramah says beforehand, that if you put an egg wash on bread, that bread needs Bishul Yisroel. I mean, the bread doesn't need to be Pas Yisroel because Pas Palter is mutter. Right. But the egg on top of it needs to be Bishul. It has to be Bishul. Yid has to participate because the egg wash on the top of it needs Bishul Yisroel. So you say, well, so then eggs are Oleh Shulchan Melachim because every bread, or just about all bread, has an egg wash on top of it. That egg wash needs to be Bishul Yisroel because it's Oleh Shulchan Melachim. If you serve the loaf of bread as Shulchan Melachim, we're judging the egg separately. So you see that eggs are Oleh Shulchan Melachim. Okay, so I said to you, eggs are not Oleh Shulchan Melachim. That's not true. Every time you serve a loaf of bread, you serve rolls that have egg on top of them, and that egg is Bishul Yisroel.
I got the bread.
You could call whatever you want to. The din is that needs Bishul Yisroel. So if it needs Bishul Yisroel, means we're treating it as if it's its own food. Okay, we talked about them. Why? Okay, now, that would be very nice, except for two things. Okay, first of all is, if that's the whole reason to require it, then something doesn't make sense over here. Because most hashgachas, and we've talked about this back then, don't require Bishul Yisroel for the egg wash that's on bread. Okay, now we talked about then why on earth they don't do that. We talked about that. We talk about why they don't do that, but Lamaisa, most of them, if you buy Wonder Bread, it's not under Hashgacha, so we use that as an example. If you buy Wonder Bread with Hashgacha on it, it wouldn't be Bishul Yisroel. It wouldn't be Bishul Yisroel even though it has an egg wash on top of it, probably. It has an egg wash on top of it because we're making it Pas Yisroel, so I'm making it Bishul Yisroel. But as the egg shaboy, of course it is, but as the egg shaboy, we wouldn't be, most Hashgachas wouldn't make it.
They spritz egg over it
on the top of
glaze.
So if for whatever reason we don't do that, you can't then say, and therefore it makes it make it Oleh Shulchan Melachim. And the second thing is,
we have with the that we have at the university. What's it called? Over here,
Yes, 57th Street.
What's it called? Rosen's.
Right. Okay. The second thing is that we know that if there's 5 different ways to prepare a food, that each one is judged separately. So the fact that you use egg wash, I don't know what you call that, baking, I don't know what you're going to call that egg. So baked eggs would need Bishul Yisroel, but hard-boiled eggs don't go on top of bread. No. So the fact that one's Oleh Shulchan Melachim doesn't mean that hard-boiled eggs are Oleh Shulchan Melachim. So what he just said is, we have 2 of his companies that make hard-boiled eggs. If they make sure that they're Bishul Yisroel, do those get served at Shulchan Melachim? Does anybody serve?
Egg salad.
They use that a lot in the catering.
What do they do with that?
Egg salads and stuff.
Egg salad.
And now Shulchan Melachim.
And what do they do with egg salad? What do you
serve it by brissom? Serve it by
right. So that backs the question.
Here's it all again. What is
That's
it?
my question.
Right.
If the bris is not Oleh Shulchan Aruch, is not considered Shulchan Aruch, then the fact that they would serve it there doesn't count.
Okay.
So even if we're going to say the egg washed, and therefore baked eggs somehow need Bishul Yisroel, but hard-boiled eggs are not that. What do you do with hard-boiled eggs? You can't make a souffle out of hard-boiled eggs. So when you're making hard-boiled eggs, why does that need Bishul Yisroel? So according to him, then it's because you serve it at
a breakfast,
an official breakfast meeting, then maybe we would still have an explanation for it.
maybe.
No, so maybe we still have it.
Deviled eggs?
What?
Or they go ahead and they have a salad, and they go ahead and they dress it,
Deviled eggs is called
Caesar salad. Right?
Deviled eggs is called
Deviled eggs.
Deviled eggs.
Yeah, but eggs aren't really as cooked much, are they? Are they cooked?
Sure they are. They're fully cooked, then they bake
They bake them afterwards, okay. So maybe it's not the
something
Gemara,
and bake them.
maybe it's not the Gemara of the,
Okay.
Okay, we're getting
Okay, I'm almost done. I'm almost done. Okay. Now, just in this thing, just go back to the thing we said back before, which is, Ken Zayn, I'm asking you a question. I'm asking you a question. You're giving me many answers. I'm asking you a question is, why eggs are Oleh Shulchan Aruch? But with that question can now help us understand, remember we said back before him, that according to Rashi, we know why the Gemara used the case of Beit Sluya. Beit Sluya was because Rashi needed a case where the person's not touching the egg still in its shell, and whatever that means. Okay, and according to Taisus, we can now say that the reason why the Gemara used a case of Beit Sluya was because the Gemara needed a case of an egg that's Oleh Shulchan Aruch. Okay, so the Gemara didn't say eggs. The Gemara said a specific kind of egg because that was the kind of egg that for them was Oleh Shulchan Aruch. Now, I'm asking that for us, which ones are which. But we could say for Taisus, we ask, why according to Taisus does it say Beit Sluya? What would be the reason for that? So we can now say that the reason for that is that somehow in those days a Beit Sluya, whatever Beit Sluya means, was the one that was Oleh Shulchan Aruch. So the Gemara picked that case so we could focus the Shiloh on whether it's Nefcha or not Nefcha.
please finalize